Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcast co-production, recorded on a Wagbical country. And I pay my respects to all elders past and present and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
But I think that, in some of these suburbs on the North Shore, the free love of the 60s and 70s didn't really hit, and maybe it still hasn't hit. It's like puberty blues in a more conservative environment, I guess.
Hello, I am Nick Wasiliev, former host of Tell Me What to Read, author of When Men Cry, and we're continuing our series shining a light on debut novelists and their journey to publication. If you're looking for a brand new author to check out, this is the place to be. If you're looking for writing inspiration, this is the place to be. This is Date with a Debut, because nothing hits you like a first impression. And if I sound a little different today, it's because I am live in a studio, which is really, really exciting. I'm out on a Wagbical country, out on the University of Newcastle campus, and I'm sitting down with Dr. Meg Vertigan to discuss her book, The Strong Dress. Meg's had an unbelievable career, which we'll get into in a second. She started off in the coal mine. She's worked in fashion. She's now a teacher. And she studies and she teaches and creative writing here at the University of Newcastle. And her book, The Strong Dress, as mentioned, is published by Puncher and Watman. Hello. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. It's nice to see someone face to face and in the studio. We're always doing this remotely usually, so it's nice to have you in person.
Yes, it's much better. Much better. I can see your facial expressions.
I know. It can often be sometimes a bit jarring when you're like, oh, I've been used to doing remote podcasts and now here I am again in the studio. So start off. Tell us a little bit about you and how you started your writing journey.
Well, I think I started my writing journey when I was a little girl, in a way. I used to eat up Enid Blyton and the Famous Five and the Secret Seven. Mm-hmm. And I'd always try and write stories like that where they're, lost in a tunnel and there's going to be treasure and all that kind of stuff. It'd be funny to read one of those again, I suppose. I don't know where they are. I doubt that they still exist, which could be a good thing.
It's so funny. You're like the second or third person in doing this podcast. I was chatting with Amy Taylor just yesterday, and she was also saying Enid Blyton was just a huge inspiration for her in terms of that was it. That was the moment. It was like her Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show moment, where she was like, I want to be, someone made that and I want to transform myself into that.
Wow, that's really interesting. So interesting. Probably irrelevant, but I remember reading my daughter the Enid Blyton books, and, they're so sexist.
Yes.
And I used to change the names. So the girls were always like climbing trees and getting holes in their trousers, and all the boys were like sewing and crying.
Yeah.
And then my mum started reading her one and reading it normally, and my daughter's like, it doesn't go like that.
Good. I appreciate that. So you've done, you've worked in many different fields and everything like that, and then you became a teacher. So how did that then lead to you going, actually, you know what, I want to try and put out a book?
I think it's something, again, that I've always wanted to do, but life got in the way. I've had a lot of, terrible jobs just trying to pay the rent, and then becoming a teacher, which is great, but, it's a lot of work and a lot of nights spent marking or preparing and that kind of thing. So I would love to have done it earlier, but finally, I've done it. So, part of it is that I did creative writing when I went to uni, and I did my PhD in creative writing. So that, I guess, gave me the space to, be forced to have a deadline, I guess.
The moment that a deadline comes in, it's like, oh, okay, suddenly you're galvanized into action.
Yeah, and I think that writing, it's one of those things that it's given hobby status, and to take yourself seriously and put that ahead of, I don't know, other things that you're supposed to be doing is really difficult, because you have to do the washing, but you don't have to do your writing.
No.
So to put it into a part of your life where you have to do it, I think it's kind of important.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, because instead of just like talking about it, you're actively in a place where you're like, oh, I have to
do this.
You have to do this. This is a core fundamental thing that I have to do in my day-to-day.
Yeah.
And it's so great because it has culminated in this book.
Yes, it has.
The Strong Dress, which I'm holding in my hand right here. I'm sorry for everyone in the audio space who cannot see that, but it is true.
It does have a fantastic cover, I have
It
to
is.
say.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the cover because it looks like it's a gorgeous cover, but it kind of also looks like a magazine. A little bit with little catchphrases and things on the side and all the spiel that looks like, new idea a little bit sometimes. Talk me through this.
Yeah, it's supposed to look like, the main character, Kate, is obsessed with Cleo magazines and she wants to become the next Ida Buttrose, who used to edit Cleo. And so I wanted I was really lucky because I went with a publisher where I had a lot of say in what the cover would look like. So I was very lucky like that. So I wanted it to look like a 1970s Cleo with the font and the sort of wallpaper behind the girl on the girl on the cover who I guess is our main character.
Stop the podcast! Stop the podcast! Hello, it is Nick Wasiliev here, host of Date with a Debut, and I just wanted to reach out and say thank you to all of our incredible listeners on the Words and Nerds platform who have been listening to the podcast and sending messages of support. It has been absolutely humbling to hear from fellow authors, fellow readers, fellow writers, and fellow podcast listeners about the show. And it is a real privilege to turn you guys on to many exciting new and upcoming authors. The reason why I'm reaching out here is because one of the groups I've heard the most from is a lot of aspiring writers who have been wanting to learn more about the actual process of getting your book into publication. How do you complete a manuscript? How do you find a publisher? How do you complete the editing process? And how do you get that book printed and into stores? Of course, we cannot fully cover it in an episode of the podcast every single week, but I have another podcast that I dropped in 2021 called A Little Idea. This podcast essentially covers my entire process that I went with my debut novel, When Men Cry, from writing to publication to promotion. Over the course of this 5-part mini-series, I sit down with some of the biggest names in the Australian publishing scene to cover this entire process front to back. And the best part, this entire series is completely free and available to listen wherever you get any of your podcasts. Please enjoy this brief snippet of episode 4 from A Little Idea, where I chat with David Henley and John McDonald from Brio Books around the value of a good book design cover and the fine margins you have when it comes to selling your book.
The biggest risk is with authors is that they are so close and they're so invested that sometimes they have a quite ethereal picture of what the book cover will look like, but they can never draw it, they can never capture it themselves, and anything you present to them will be wrong because you can never catch that holy grail. So that's the big trap, is when an author has this holy grail image in mind of the book cover. And in some ways they're investing too much in a book cover. We are saying a book cover is important, but it can't do everything. It cannot tell the entire story. It cannot explain that there's a plot twist on this certain page. It cannot capture all the characters. It probably can't even capture the essence of one character.
Yeah.
It is simply there as much like getting dressed. It is putting the best clothes on the body, which is the book.
It's an advertisement. That's exactly right.
I really felt myself going into a hole there.
You got out.
To hear more, head to the links in the description or head to my website, nickwasiliev.com, and check out my podcast, A Little Idea, and start your own writing journey. All right, back to Date with a Debut. Let's talk about the strong dress now because, as seen by the cover, she doesn't look very happy at all. And so tell us, what is the strong dress about?
Well, The Strong Dress is about a psychiatrist, Jack Grafton, from the 70s, early 80s, and he used to say that he could cure any mental illness. So whether you had bipolar or schizophrenia, anorexia, drug, alcohol addiction, or whether it sort of went so far as to maybe you don't get along with your parents, maybe you're a bit of a wild child, maybe you don't like having sex with your husband. Any of these things could lead to you being treated by Jack Grafton. And so the main character, Kate, she was a 17-year-old girl, but I think that, in some of these suburbs on the North Shore, the free love of the 60s and 70s didn't really hit, and maybe it still hasn't hit. So it's like puberty blues in a more conservative environment, I guess. So what is bad behaviour in one context is perhaps mad behaviour in another.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarise it, because now Kate then undergoes slumber therapy at the hands of Dr. Grafton.
Yes.
And we'll try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, because long and the short of it, I want people to go and buy the book. But let's just say things take a turn after that.
They do.
In the most general way possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is such an interesting book. It's confronting. You don't pull punches with this story, and you jump between characters as well. And there's a lot of topics you cover. You cover the treatment of mental illness. You cover masculine and feminine roles in 1970s Australia, and also how the actions of Dr. Grafton, of Jack and his slumber therapy, the trauma that causes as well. I'm just curious, where did this story come from?
Well, I was actually in the car one day and I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about women who had been put into mental institutions in the 1920s, often for, disobeying their fathers, or doing something really wild like having a boyfriend. And a lot of these women didn't get out until the 80s, when they closed some of these asylums down, and till they were in their 80s, I mean. And by that time they were so institutionalised that they couldn't really function in society. So I was really interested in that, and I was researching that, and then I came across this type of therapy that was done in England and Australia, where they would put their patients to sleep, basically put them into an induced coma for up to 3 months, and a lot of patients didn't survive this. And it's a cure-all. Every patient got the same treatment. So I thought that this was really interesting.
It's so interesting. And I will first of all say, just from a technical standpoint, this is me just looking at it purely the writer technique side of thing. Your use and exercise in voice between these characters is phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like Kate is 17. She's still learning about the world. She's got a shifting attention all over the place. And as mentioned, she's grappling with the fact that the hippie culture and the free love culture hasn't exactly made it
to Beecroft.
to Beecroft and the North Shore. And then that turns, as the story progresses, into trauma and how she's affected by this therapy that she undergoes, and how that it's like taking a sledgehammer to it. The approach that they take. And then on the other side, you contrast it with Jack. And I mean, I don't think this counts as this doesn't count as a spoiler for the end of the book, but we will mention that I'll add it as a point that Jack takes his life, ends his life at some point at this story. He's actively involved in this clinical abuse, effectively.
Yes.
So where did these characters come from, and how was it like writing in each space? Because the contrast is really interesting.
Well, I guess the 17-year-old girl, they say everything's a bit autobiographical. nothing particularly that she does really, but we're all still 17 at heart. But it was really fun because she's beautiful and blonde with popular and nice skin and nice boobs, and that wasn't me at high school. So I got to inhabit the perfect 17-year-old girl, which was a lot of fun. As far as Jack Grafton, I was influenced by a doctor called Harry Bailey, who did take his life during a royal commission, and I was influenced by him and by just that sort of gregarious male that the media loved him, and a lot of patients loved him because he just had this way with words and a way with just getting other people to love him, even though he was doing some pretty despicable things.
Just the contrast is so interesting, and as the story unfolds and we find out more, it put me into this weird space. We were talking about it beforehand, before we started recording. You asked, how did the book make me feel, or what were my thoughts on it? And I was like, look, it put me in a place. It put me in a really interesting...
You said it put you in a mood.
It put me in a mood. And I meant that as a compliment, because, I felt heartbroken. Again, I felt, confronted by what was happening in front of me on the page, but also angry. Like it was the sort of white hot anger that it elicited this reaction. And I think a part of that is because I'm looking at it in a contemporary perspective. We're doing a contemporary comparison between now and then about how we treat mental illness and the issues that go on in that space, and how in the 70s it was such extreme measures were used as a way of treating it, instead of now where there's much more of an understanding around it.
Yeah, I think it was a lot more experimental too.
Yeah.
So a lot of what they were doing, putting these people into these coma therapies, they were experimenting. There was even supposedly a competition between a doctor in Australia and a doctor in England for how long they could keep their patients in a coma for. So, yeah, there was definitely that experimental, but just cowboys, really.
Yeah. I think the
No
other...
regulation.
Yeah, exactly. And the other reason why I think it makes you feel these particular ways, and I feel like it's also because that it's not necessarily... This isn't necessarily gone. There is still...
No.
This is like... And talking about it beforehand, we were talking about how, I've known stories of friends or family who, a doctor will prescribe them anything, and it will get hit with side effects, but the doctor just does it just because they're like, well, this is the thing that'll probably work, and this is what it'll deal with. And you were even mentioning before that, there are still things happening today that can compare to some of the things that happen in this book.
Yes, definitely. I think that what we were talking about was the new magic mushroom.
Yes,
therapy.
that's right.
I'm not sure if I can say it properly, the psilocybin. That, I'm not anti-psychiatry at all. There's, a lot of great studies being done on this new treatment for depression. But I think one example I was giving was in Canada, there was a psychiatrist and she was married to a guy who was what they called a self-appointed counsellor. And they were putting patients under this, treatment with the psilocybin, but also sexually assaulting them at the same time, and filming it, which is why there's evidence of it. But they were doing this to cure them of trauma they'd had from being sexually assaulted. So yeah, this is today.
It doesn't feel like we've progressed that far.
Yeah,
if at all, in 50 years.
In some circumstances, yeah.
So this book isn't for the faint of heart, but I think there is, if you are someone who, there is a lot of stuff that will make you think and look at things differently.
There are funny bits though, aren't there?
Oh yeah. No, sorry. I should say it isn't all a down. Of course, there is humour in there, but there is a lot to take. It makes you think, and it makes you reanalyze, and it makes you re-examine, and it makes you think we need to do something about this or examine this more. It's a really great book. I feel like you should be super proud of it.
Yeah, I am actually. Like I sort of saw it in my car the other day. I had a copy in the back of my car, and I suddenly saw it and went, oh, that's mine. Yeah. It was a bit exciting.
Before we move on to talking about your story, your journey to publication, I actually also want to ask, you and I started talking just before the book launched. And you launched the book during the Newcastle Writers Festival, and so you launched at the Press Bookhouse. What was the launch like? What was the experience like?
The Press Bookhouse is a great little place if you haven't been there. It's a coffee shop bookshop. I went there earlier because I've been to a lot of book launches that are just in a big empty room, so I was thinking I might need to decorate. And I went in there and it was just perfect. It was
you don't need to do anything.
It's such a cool place, and they were so happy to have me do a book launch, and I sort of got right into the 70s vibe. Me and my sister made up platters with 70s hors d'oeuvres. I even made a salmon jelly shaped like a fish.
Mm.
It was really quite disgusting. And then, of course, we had Passion Pop as well, and dressed up and that kind of thing. So it was a lot of fun.
Let's talk about your process, your journey to actual publication. What was that like? Because you had this story and this idea, and you put it down on the page. What happened then?
So after I'd written it, even while I was writing it, I was thinking about who would want to publish it, and I didn't feel like a big publisher would take me on. I'm not sure. So I approached Punchbearer and Watman. And they're a local Newcastle publishing house, and they publish a lot of poetry, and they've published some novels too that have done really well, won some good competitions. So Ed Wright, who is one of the publishers there, he sort of says that they look at quality, they're interested in quality, they're not interested in the discount book at Big W kind of thing. They like to publish quality. So I was really happy that they accepted my book, and I think having that small publisher maybe got a bit more. I don't know. I got a fair bit of support and attention doing rewrites and that kind of thing.
So I'll actually kind of ask this question right now, seeing as we're talking on it, because I mean I've done a lot of podcasts with high-profile publishers and everything around that. As part of this podcast, we obviously talk about, advice and direction for people who might be listening, and they want to go, I want to find out more about, going down, what options are available for me to get my book actually published. The process of finding a local publisher. Talk us through that. What are what are some of the opportunities that can lie from going in this direction and approaching a smaller publisher, a local publisher?
I think that they often have a bit more of the ability to take on something that's not completely traditionally written. They'll take a bit more, some of the writing in my book's a little bit experimental, and so they were fine with that kind of thing. I also think if you are going to approach a smaller publisher especially, I know because I've heard these publishers complain about it, is you want to read some of their books. They get people submitting books and they haven't read any books from that publisher. And you need to find a match, publisher that matches you. It's almost like dating. So, if you've written a horror story and then you send it to a romance publisher, I mean, that's probably an extreme example. But, you really, especially approaching a small publisher, need to be aware of what their works are like and let them know that you're aware too and where your book fits into that.
Yeah, this is just good general advice for anyone, by the way. I want to emphasize that. If you suddenly send a book off to Murdoch and you're like, this is a fiction book I can use, and Murdoch's, most of their publishing is cookbooks and things like that. Clearly you haven't sent it to the right publisher.
Yeah.
So picking and choosing and knowing which ones are more likely to actually push and be a champion for your book is something that is really, really handy advice.
Yeah, and one thing I found with a smaller publisher too is that although they're a small publisher, that within certain circles they are known, and they have a really good distribution. So they go through New South Books, which I think a lot of
New South Publishing,
a lot of. You might be able to explain a bit more what that is, but it means that my book's in QBD and Dymix and all those places. So just because you're going with a small publisher doesn't mean that you're not going to get reach.
Yes, exactly. So it's a distribution thing. So a lot of smaller imprints can often they connect with a distributor or even some other publishers in other ways, shape or form, and that enables their books to actually go out into the world and be on actual shelves. So there is if you've got a good strong local publisher who has connections with, say, New South Publishing, which is for you, your books can still be on a bookshelf in Western Australia or out in Sydney or wherever it may be.
That's right. I Googled it my own book. I'm sure everyone who's written a book has done this. And I found it's in some really interesting places like Liverpool Library.
Yep.
I had no idea how it ended up in Liverpool Library, but it's in Liverpool Library. So, yeah, even with a small publisher, you do get that reach.
Yeah, and it's additionally as well, like if you're trying something out that is, not necessarily something that a mainstream publisher would go for, it's a great option.
I think so.
It's a great option. And on top of it, it's a local business, and it's someone who's in the area. You can meet them, you can speak to them.
And they're really passionate about what they do.
Yeah, and that's
It's
often
not a job to them, it's a way of life.
yeah, and it can be a better fit for that book.
I think so.
That's the key thing. It's not just about you getting your book out there. It's also making sure that your book has the right home at the end of the day.
Okay, yeah. I hadn't thought of it like that, but that's true.
I want to ask you a little bit about the editing process as well, because
Okay.
you said you went through rewrites and a lot of changes. What was that experience like? Because often you've got your first draft and it's just like a splodge on the page.
Okay.
Was that the case for you, or
No, it had gone through a fair bit by the time they got to it. There was most of the editing I actually agreed with. There was one part of it they wanted me to change a character, because it's not like editing spelling words, and
yeah,
it's not line editing. They can sort of want you to do. Actually, we changed the ending. It did originally end up that both the narrators were the same person.
Whoa.
And the publishers didn't think that worked, and I had to sort of think, well, they're the ones that have experience with looking at these things, and I had to trust them and trust the process. So that part didn't bother me, because I didn't think I'd executed it particularly well anyway. But there was one other character that they asked me to change a bit, and that took quite a few goes to get right. And I kind of liked it how it was before, but again, like if 9 out of 10 things you're agreeing with, then maybe this other thing they are also correct. But I didn't have to change. There were some things that I said, no, I want it like that, and that was fine too. So it really is a two-way street.
It's very much a collaborative process. Like books don't happen in isolation. It's not just one author. There's a whole team behind it.
It's a very different book from what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say would be your advice for first-time readers and authors who are looking to potentially write their own story and don't know where to begin? What would be the one thing that you would say?
Well, I think that's a difficult question for me, because I teach creative writing at the university.
Yes, I know, which is it's a bit slightly more pointed.
and I think that doing a creative writing course, like a good creative writing course, is really helpful for two reasons. One is that you also have to read certain texts, and they're texts that you probably wouldn't normally read. They might not be your style. They might be things that you hate, but you will learn things from those texts. And then you also, thrown into that process of reading in front of other people, reading your work in front of other people, and having them give you feedback, which can be confronting at first. I mean, we do it very gently at first, but just sitting in your bedroom and writing and expecting to come out with a masterpiece, I don't know if there's anyone who's done that. Like, even if you take, I'm not sure if I'm correct about this, but J.K. Rowling, there's that story that she was like in her coffee shop and she was poor, single mother, writing her wizard books. In actual fact, she was a journalist and she'd worked in publishing. So she knew how to write. She knew the niche in the market. And it was her brother-in-law's coffee shop, so she probably got free coffee. So, that image of writing in your own little garret all alone, I don't know whether, I think that being, I don't know.
The romantic kind of assumption that the fluff that usually comes with, like, I wrote this story and it's amazing, it's not true.
Yeah.
It's like it's a fantasy that you tell yourselves, and the truth is it's hard work.
Yeah, and I think, like, if you're in a band, you wouldn't expect to be, obviously you're going to be practicing on your own in your bedroom, but at some point you've got to get out there with the other band members, and you've got to make something together, and that's when the real music happens, in a way.
Absolutely. What's next for you? Will you write again?
I've started writing another book. I think that you mentioned coal mines that I grew up, in the lee of coal mines down in the Latrobe Valley. And, people say write what you know, and I don't actually like that expression at all because, you can research. Just on a sidetrack, I had a student once and her teacher had said to her, write what you know. So, you're a 16-year-old girl. You wouldn't write about being, a gay soldier in World War II in the trenches. And so this girl went home and wrote a story about being a gay soldier in World War II in the trenches. And
Good.
She won like a prize from one of the major newspapers, like a young short story award. So I do believe research. You don't need to write what you know, but that's a sidetrack because I am going to write what I know. So when I grew up, you think your own childhood's boring and then you look back on it. And we lived in a little town called Yallourn, and they decided to dig up Yallourn because it was sitting on top of coal. And so people got their houses cut in half and put onto the back of trucks and moved to another town, Morwell. And so my childhood, I just remember you'd be driving along and then there's a house on the back of a truck and you'd look in and you'd see, that 70s wallpaper fluttering in the wind, from the kitchen, and you'd look in to see what the house was like. And so that's pretty interesting, I think. And we also used to swim in the cooling waters from the, the power station, which, was thick with this green sludge. And schools had their swimming lessons in there. And when we were young teenagers, we used to skinny dip in there. And it's actually quite disgusting. It's a wonder we're still alive. But I'm like, okay, there's a story in here. I'm not sure what it is 100%. I'm working on it. But, it's about power, I think.
I'll be excited to watch when that comes out into the world and when you finally have we'll see what you craft from those fascinating little pieces of information from the 70s. And I'll also say, as a disclosure, I appreciate so much, Lee, that 16-year-old girl went and wrote a story about a gay soldier.
Oh, yeah.
I hate, whenever people say write what you knew, I hate that. Because it puts creatives in a box.
It does.
And I hate that. I think it's, if you can, I think you have the power to write anything you want.
Yes.
The trick is when you're talking about, if you start going to stuff that you might not have had personal experience with, the trick is then you get it right.
You get it right.
That's the importance of it.
I have to say, if you get it wrong, it can be quite, when my students are writing, if they say they were writing driving a 1969 green Corolla, I will literally Google if there was a green Corolla in 1969.
Yeah.
You've got to get it right because you're going to annoy someone. And my favourite example is Christos Sulkas wrote a book, his first book called Loaded, and he had a bag of speed in this book. And he took some, had a few lines, and then he went out and he went to a party. And then he shared this, it was like a $50 bag of speed, shared this with his friends at the party, and then he went somewhere else and he shared some more with somebody else. And if you've ever bought no disclosure, if you've ever bought a $50 bag of speed, it's not lasting this long.
No, I could tell where this was going.
This bag of speed lasted an awfully long time and he shared it with a lot of people. And I'm like, Christos, come on.
Look, even great authors make mistakes sometimes.
That's right.
It's true. But no, great advice. Yeah, don't be put in a box. You can write anything as long as you get it right. As long as when you are approaching those subjects, you make sure you do your research and you get it right.
Yeah.
We'll finish with some fun, light-hearted, rapid-fire questions. So I'm just going to fling them at you. No pressure whatsoever.
All right, let's see.
What's your favourite book that you have read in the last 12 months?
I've recently just read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
Oh my God, I feel like I've heard that. That's been recommended in this podcast before, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I hadn't read it before. I don't know how I'd missed it. And it's fantastic. And I'm actually teaching. The reason I read it is because somebody else is unwell and I'm teaching their course. And it's an adaptation course. And one of them is Rebecca. So there's a couple of different movies. There's a Netflix series and the original book. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah.
Really, really good. Do you have a favourite word?
Oh, autumnal.
Oh, what's that?
When it's autumn.
Really?
I don't know. It just came out. It's actually not my favourite word. It's my partner's, but he loves that word. And it was, when you said favourite word, it was what came out.
I love it.
Yeah. He likes that word and he likes pilchers.
That's a nice word too.
I should
Pilchers.
have my own favourite word, shouldn't I?
It's okay though. I mean, like you can start from somewhere else
Oh,
and then pick it up from there.
Yeah.
Where is your favourite place to read? In bed, on the couch, or out the back in the shade on a sunny afternoon?
On the trampoline.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, I think that was something that, I started doing. When you get to that age where you stop jumping on the trampoline, it becomes like a social area with your friends.
Yeah.
And, back then, you obviously can't see me, but I'm lily white. And back then we used to put the baby oil on and try so hard to get that suntan, especially down in Victoria, and read a book out on the trampoline. Yeah, and I still do.
Love it. What is one thing that you've learnt from actually writing a book that you wish you knew when you were lecturing it before you wrote the book?
Oh, definitely. I didn't know about copyright. And as a university person, you can write whatever you want as long as you say who said that. So in this book, there are mentions of some songs. So there's ABBA, Dancing Queen, there's Popcorn, and there's Je t'aime, Pussyfoot. And I had quite a lot more of the lyrics written in. And I assumed that if I wrote ABBA and some Dancing Queen lyrics and I'm saying it's ABBA, it's not like I'm saying it's me, I would be fine. But no, apparently I was not fine. And that was really disappointing because if I'd known that at the start, I wouldn't have written it in that way. And, yeah, it actually was a real, a bit of a crush, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
an eye-opener, yeah.
Yeah.
What's your favourite debut book that you've ever read? So we're talking any time ever. What's the best debut you've ever read?
I mean, I do like Chris Osolka's Loaded, even though I just bagged it out completely. But Pip Williams' Dictionary of Lost Words, I didn't even realise that was her debut.
Yes, it is.
Pretty amazing.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Unbelievable book.
Yeah.
And obsession, all the words that she found.
Yes.
Just, oh, my God, such a great book.
And so, she's an example of somebody not writing what she knows and doing the research. And in fact, I think that she started doing the research before she got the idea of the book. Like she realised that the Oxford Dictionary was put together by, white men. And it wasn't just women's words that were lost. It was, lower class people like tradies or whatever that, had words that were lost or people who were illiterate, their words were lost. So it was I found that really fascinating. So she found that out first, I think, and then wrote the book from there. So
Yes.
yeah, don't have to write what you know.
Exactly. Go by the Dictionary of Lost Words. Just saying that.
Yeah.
Last question. You get in a lift and your absolute hero is in there. Who is it?
Jonathan Thurston.
Really? Didn't know you were a Cowboys fan.
I'm a Jonathan Thurston fan.
Oh, yes, please.
I just thought that he I actually am a person that doesn't have heroes. I never had the posters up on the walls. I just don't think I've got the gene to, think like that about other people. But having to pick someone, I just thought that I never watched footy before this, and my sons were playing and got me into it, and he just could, without seeming to do much, make the whole team work in a different way. He was like the puppet master in so many ways that if he wasn't there, it sort of could really fall apart. I just found him fascinating to watch.
Yeah. For me, I actually find, because I do some sports journalism outside of this podcast as well, and I actually think there's a real synergy between, creative people who are making art and writing books and stuff, but also sports people. Because a lot of them actually end up transitioning and doing something creative afterwards. Like,
do they?
Like Brandon Jack, who used to play in the AFL, he wrote a biography and is now doing creative projects, or Adam Goods with all of his children's books that he does, just as particular examples. And I actually think it comes from a similar place, except their creativity is being expressed on a field, in a game. How to manipulate and manage the game, it's like chess in a way.
Definitely.
It's a different sort of creativity, but I think it comes from a similar place.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to watch, and often a lot like talking with some athletes, they actually think about it
like that
way.
It becomes a story. Like I've had friends who, you know, because I'm not a footy person. I've never been a footy person, but I don't know. I got sucked in. And, like, you know, people used to laugh at me because they'd say, you know, the State of Origin's on, and I'd say, oh, who's playing? You know, that was my level of knowing about football. And when my kids started playing, I'm like, well, wasn't that a goal? And they're like, because it didn't go over the post. Like, I had no idea. But having watched it, like, it really is a story. And I have friends that sort of say, what do you see in it? It's just these big lumps of meat, you know, crashing into each other. I'm like, oh no, there's so much more detail than that.
There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
I could honestly chat to you all day, really, but I'm aware that you are a very busy person with
I
people
have
to
another
see.
class to teach.
You do have another class to teach. So I'll simply finish off by saying for everyone listening, go and buy The Strong Dress. It's published by Punter and Watman. And if you like the show, drop Words and Nerds a review. Let us know what you think. And I'll simply finish by saying, Meg, thanks so much. It's been so much fun.
Thank you so much. It was really good.